Hi, my name is Jay Oza. I teach, mentor, and coach people on public speaking so that they can give winning high stakes speeches. And I'm also the host of Speech Talk Live, and I'm going to briefly preview episode number 61. I'm going to be starting a series called the Great Speaker Series, where I'm going to be inviting people who speak for a living or they give a lot of speeches from whom we can learn something from. Rather than me telling you about tips and techniques based on what I'm doing, I think it would help if I bring in other people to see what they have to say so that we can all learn uh, through their experience and wisdom. In episode 61, I bring in this type of a person named Thom Winninger. Thom is a professional speaker. He's been speaking for over 40 years. And I saw Thom at an event in New Jersey where he was invited to give a speech to the National Speakers Association members, the New Jersey chapter. And I was just blown away. The three things that I noticed from Thom's speech was that became apparent was energy. Thom's not a big guy. He's not like Tony Robbins, 6'8" and big and has that presence. Thom's a small guy, but similarly, he has the presence when he's speaking. He just projects that presence. So he has tremendous energy. You notice that right away. He really knows how to tell stories, and he has a real message. And the content is kind of secondary. I'm not saying content isn't important, but content is primarily used for flow to make sure that his speech is flowing the way so that he doesn't get stuck on one topic for too long. And he's having a conversation with you. And these are some of the things that we do discuss uh, on the show that I wanted to kind of make you pay attention to. And I jotted down lots of notes. So before you watch it, make sure you have something to write down because he gives tremendous amount of information in this 30-minute conversation that I had with him. The key thing to watch out for here is that he repeats over and over again is engaging an audience to affect a change. And then he talks about his technique that he uses, anchoring, following up with a signature story, then two or three concepts that he introduces, then he unpacks them, and he ends it with a signature story. That's his technique that he discusses. And last thing that I want you to pay attention to is the three levels. The first level, like first person, when something happens to you, you got to tell your own personal story. What he says is important. The farther you remove yourself, the less authority you bring to your speech. And that's another word that he emphasizes over and over again, authority. Authority of conversation, authority of the content. And first person would be like I interviewed Thom. I went to the show. That's first person. Then if I had a conversation with him that I'm including the speech, that becomes second person. And similarly, the farther you get away from yourself, the less authority you have. And I think that's an important point that I want you to focus on. It comes kind of at the end of it, end of the conversation, but pay attention to that. Because one of the things that I see when I look at people's speeches for the Coursera course or any other courses, they're not putting themselves, their story. It's always other people's story. Now, sometimes you have to, but try to find your story first and then second, other people's story second or third. Okay? So watch the show. You're going to learn a lot from this, and I believe it's going to make you a better speaker. I learned a lot, and I think you will too. Let me know what you think and enjoy the conversation. Thank you. Hello, welcome to Speech Talk Live. This is episode number 61. My name is Jay Oza, and I am the mentor for the Coursera public speaking courses on the internet that's available for anybody to take. One of the things that I do is I teach, I mentor, and coach people on public speaking. And one of the things that I'm working on, which should be available, is a book on public speaking, tentatively titled Create Speaking Moments. That it's in the final stages of editing, and it should be available by the end of March. I got my fingers crossed. With books, I'm learning it takes sometimes a lot longer than getting it out. I'm really excited about today's show, as I have Thom Winninger on the show. Thom is a professional speaker who's been speaking for over 40 years. And some of the accomplishment of Thom, which I'll let him describe. He's a past president of National Speakers Association. Is author of some close to 7 books. He has given, I believe, close to 3,000 keynote, and he's a friend and confidant. So, Thom, welcome to Speech Talk Live. We are very glad that that you can join us and impart some of your wisdom, because a lot of the people that listen to the show and the people who main target are the people who take the Coursera course. A lot of them are kind of starting out. Some of them have fear. Some of them are ready to give speeches. Many of them are professionals, by the way, technical, etc. And some of them are getting ready to give talks, to give their PhD dissertation, things like that. So welcome to the show. And if I missed anything, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you actually get into public speaking?
Well, thanks, Jay. It's a great honor to be with you. I'm a broadcast journalist by education. So being in front of a mic or a camera was where I thought I was supposed to be when I got started. But I learned quickly, having been with an NBC affiliate for a while, I didn't have the face. So I ended up in radio, and I got tired of a radio booth. And it was always interesting that every job I had, somebody asked me to go out and represent the company. So WTMJ Television in Milwaukee asked me to go speak to organizations in town about what we do in broadcasting. And this happened when I left the broadcasting business and went into the financial services business, the same thing. So it became apparent to me that I must be doing something that somehow engages an audience in a confident belief that what I'm talking about can make a difference in their life. And that really became the theme of my speaking. I left there and went to work for a family real estate company. Things didn't work out. I sold the stock in the company to my brother, made national trade press in real estate. And all of a sudden, I started getting invitations from people who wanted me to talk about that. What I really want to talk about was how small business can scale themselves like big business and still be small business. But that was the launch of the career. And wrote 7 books. I wrote the book on Price Wars, which was an expose on what happens when box stores come to small town America. And that kind of launched the activity of my career. But I've learned so many things because I made a decision to be a student of the business, to be a student of professional speaking. Don't just be a professional speaker. Listen to yourself, analyze yourself, listen to others, not because you want to be like them, but you want to understand the effect they have and how they get that effect. So in other words, any speech is given to create an effect. What is the effect? So for example, my audiences typically are dealers. I'm typically hired by a manufacturer who puts on dealer meetings, and I speak to 150 or 200 or 300 dealers in a room for an hour, which we call a keynote, as opposed to a seminar or a speech. When you're a professional speaker, you categorize what you do. So I'm a keynoter by career who also does some seminar and workshop work, but very little. So I don't talk about giving speeches, I talk about giving keynotes, which is really a model of engaging an audience to do something after the speech or keynote is over. So in other words, when they leave the room, what is the intent that they do? What do they do to change the world, to make it a better place, for example? Or to deliver higher value to the company they work for, or to be more focused on what they need to do to build value in their product or their service. But what is the intent or outcome objective of the speech? And that's something we need to focus on as we go along. And then from that, then you learn that there's ways to engage an audience rather than just give a speech and present content, because the model you use to engage the audience lends to the authority of the content that you deliver in the speech. So if you write it out, stand behind a podium and read it to the audience, you have no authority. If you write it out, learn the key points, put it in a PowerPoint, and speak from the PowerPoint, you have a little more authority. So in other words, you're engaging an audience in the power of the content because of the way you give the presentation. And I'll walk you through a little bit of how to build authority into a speech so that you engage them at a little higher level than just giving a speech. And so that's kind of how it all got started. And now I'm at it 40 years, given over 3,000 speeches, written 7 books, and produced a bunch of video. The videos naturally now are not 50 minutes anymore. They're now 13 minutes or 7 minutes or 20 minutes because people want speeches that are thematically focused into single takeaways. So in other words, if you're doing an hour speech, you better have 3 takeaways that are action items that you focus on so they can conceptualize it. Adults have real difficulty with sustained listening today. I think that's because of the way TV shows are produced and radio shows are produced, that it's bam, 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 and it's so busy and active that we've got to bring that same intensity sometimes to our speeches. So if you chop up the time and say, look, I'm speaking at a Rotary meeting and I've got 25 minutes, then the beauty of that is you've got one key focus or concept and you're dancing with it so that they get the idea that that's more than one. It's just not one concept. It's something that can affect them all the way around. And so that's kind of how it goes. But this whole engagement piece is critical for me. And the engagement piece is not to go to them. The engagement piece is to get the audience to come to you. The idea is to understand where your audience is at, not just try to talk about where you're at, trying to get to them, if that makes any sense. So if I walk across the bridge and I identify where I know they're at, and then I bring them back across the bridge to me. So at the beginning of my speech, I always use anchors. An anchor is a statement of an understanding that relates to their situation. Like, for example, an anchor might be, how many of you are stuck in your life and your career? Well, everybody's stuck in their life and their career. Rather than opening with, once upon a time, I was stuck. And this is how I got out of it. You go across the bridge and you say, okay, how many of you have this experience and this experience and this experience? You get a few hands going up. Or you say, by nod of head, I can imagine most of you in this room have gotten to a place in your career or your job where something isn't working. How close am I? Now you're with them, bringing them to you, rather than you just standing up and saying, you know, I spent all this time researching this subject area and I've discovered that most people are stuck and you probably are too, but this is how I got unstuck. Not very engaging model. So in the speech, we begin typically with anchors. We follow with a story that illustrates our own experience to being stuck, for example, or whatever it is, or the research we came up with. And then we give them 2 to 3 concepts that they can relate to. And then you unpack those 2 or 3 concepts. So I don't do a speech on unstuck. I'm just using that as an example. But one of those might be, if you're not in the moment, you can't manage what's happening in your life or your job. So people get stuck because they get too far out of today. That would be a concept. So getting in the moment is one of the 3 concepts that you would present in about 30 minutes. And then you tell a little story about being stuck, and then you give them a way to get unstuck. So your speech is made up of an anchor in the beginning, a signature story, which is personal to you, which usually has to be funny, engaging, and full of energy. Don't be boring. You know, pick out something they can laugh about. And usually people can laugh in pain because pain needs laughter. And then you come up with 3 concepts and you give them a story to each concept and you give them an action statement with each concept. And then you close with another signature story. Like, for example, a signature story for me is always about the grill. So, you know, I turned 60 years old and I wanted to go out and buy a sports car. In the meantime, my wife went out and bought me a grill. She bought the grill from Walmart, which means it had to be put together. When I came home with my sports car, I raised the garage door, and there was this huge box in the garage with a bow on it from my wife that says, "Love you, honey. Hope you love this." Now, how can anybody love a box with 850 nuts and bolts and metal parts in it that take 3 days to put together in your den? Because when you buy a grill from this supplier, you put it together. But I love her and hate the grill, and I don't want her to know I hate the grill. I want her to know I love her, so I put it together in the den, spent a case of Amstel Light beer trying to get through this, and then discovered when I got it done, it's not coming out of the den. First of all, I shouldn't have built it together in the den. It's too big to get out of the den. So now I got two problems. One, it's not coming out of the den. Number two, there's no wheels in the box for the grill. So I call Walmart on the phone. The person on the phone says, "That's okay. You can just bring it back." This grill ain't coming back. It's in my den. But she said, "No, you have to bring it back. Put it back in the box, bring it back, and we'll give you another grill." And then my little mind says, "Yes, and I'll bet that box doesn't have any wood in it either." So that's a signature story for me. The important thing I've discovered in my whole life about having authority is to be first person to your stories, not second or third person to your stories. First person, second, third person.
Tom, can I just interrupt you for a second before you move on to that? Because I just want to...
I don't take a breath, Jay. It's just...
Right. I just said, let me just... So I like what you just said. I think this is very helpful to people who are, kind of starting out speaking. And a lot of the people who are likely to watch it are not professional speakers. They're just kind of starting out. But I like what you said about you got to start with an anchor, then you have to have a signature. That's how you do it. Signature story, then 2 or 3 concept, and then close it out with a signature story. Now, is this technique that you just described, it's pretty universal? Can anybody use it? Or this is applicable for somebody who's giving a keynote speech? Like, let's say somebody who wants to give a business presentation. Would this technique work for that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is that it keeps them engaged because it has a format that's based on engagement. So if I was giving a business speech on, throw out a subject that somebody might give a business speech on, I'll dance around it.
Let's say somebody wants to talk about, since I'm in the tech, let's say innovation. Okay.
So then you say, how many of you would like to do things that haven't been done before from an innovative standpoint so that what you're doing can stand out in a crowd? That would be an anchor. In other words, I go to something that tends to frustrate the audience, somewhere where they have kind of a felt pain around something. That's the anchor. This can be in any speech. Anybody can use my format. I designed this myself, and I really did it 2 ways. Number one, I have skills for this. It's part of my DNA. And so I recorded myself and I started analyzing what I was doing. And this is the pattern I was doing before I realized it was a pattern I was doing. I was working. So I watched myself on video. I wrote out the pattern and then I tweaked the pattern so that I could watch audience engagement, their faces, their body language. Are they leaning forward? Are they leaning back? When you get really into this business, you videotape the audience while you're videotaping yourself so you can see where the audience is reacting to your presentation. Because if you're giving a 30-minute or 50-minute speech, you want to pattern it so you get the most engagement, physical, mental engagement from your audience that you can. So you watch them and you say certain things and you see them lean forward, and you say certain things and you see them laugh, and you say certain things and they nudge the guy next to him, person next to him. You see where I'm going with this? So that's how the pattern came about. And I just give the pattern to anybody. Because if you're really good at, it's like playing tennis. If you're really good at it, you don't think about hitting the ball. You think about where you hit the ball. So the pattern becomes invisible the more professional and better you get at the pattern. So anybody can use a pattern. You can use it in a sales meeting, for example.
Right. And is this the pattern pretty much you use? Because there are like so many different kind of speech structures that people learn about. And the structure you gave, it seems like it's very easy to follow and anybody can do it. Do you ever change that structure at all? Or this is the structure you pretty much stay with?
Rarely. Sometimes I don't do the whole pattern. Sometimes I don't do 3 concepts or 3 ideas in the middle. I do 1. I always anchor, and I always have some kind of signature story at the beginning that's short, not long. Don't let your signature story grow over time, and they will, because the more you tell it, the more you embellish it, and then all of a sudden the speech becomes the signature story, and you don't want that to happen. And it actually happened in my career where everybody loved the story, and I told a story for 30 minutes, and they walk away and say, how am I supposed to use this? Because a speech is supposed to be application. So in other words, you want them to do something with what you're talking about. You want them to agree in a business meeting with you. You want them to apply it in the workplace. You want to change the course of the company, something. So you have to model it so that engagement, that action statement happens at the end. What do I do as a result of hearing this speech?
Right. Now, I had the pleasure of seeing Thom at a National Speakers Association event in the New Jersey chapter last Thursday. And Thom, one of the questions I have is, you have this structure, and you're already, because you don't use any notes, you have some content you work with, but content is just there to kind of keep the flow going. That's what I noticed. How much improvisation do you actually do based on, like you mentioned, like if you see an audience, if they're getting bored or something, or if you're not resonating with them, do you have latitude to change your story on the fly, or you're kind of hard-coded to go with what you have already rehearsed and practiced before actually giving a speech? Yes. How does that work with you?
That's good. Well, it's unconscious now, because when you do 3,000, what you do oftentimes you become unconscious, but you become very aware that you're spending too much time on one concept. And that's really what happens. So if you see an audience floating away from you, go to the next point. Don't spend more time burying the point that you're losing them on. But I always make sure in advance, and I've done this with every speech that I've ever given, is get a chance to talk to 2 or 3 of the people in the audience if you don't know them before you speak. So you get an idea of where they're coming from. And that's the key. So I've done like 12,000 interviews in 40 years of people, typically by phone, who the meeting organizer told me were in the audience and gave me their phone numbers. I call them on the phone, I talk to them. What's their biggest challenge in business? What will be on the mind during my presentation? Where do they find roadblocks in their life? What do they really do? In other words, what's the purpose of their work? And I do these for 5 to 10 minutes. And so before I go in, I've almost got an insurance policy that I have a pretty good idea of what those 3 concepts are I'm going to present during my speech. And then while I'm speaking, my body can tune into when I'm losing them, which means I move on to the next one. So, because I said, do anchor, get them there, signature story, get them there, concept 1, story, reaction or action for that concept, how they do the concept, and then move to the next one. I'll shorten the amount of time it takes to get into any one of the concepts, which brings the energy back. It's like move to the next PowerPoint slide, stupid, because they're hanging on this one too long and it's driving them away. So it's more a timing thing. It's the same when you're speaking with somebody. You can sense this one-on-one communication is that if they're drifting away, it's because you're doing all the talking and they have to do all the listening. You need to engage them in that. And you saw it in my presentation, that I was engaging them.
Right. One of the things that I noticed, and for the viewers, is that when Thom, you should, I'm going to put out some links of his, some of his YouTube speeches, and also I'll include his link to his website, how he does it. Thom's a pro. But one of the things that Thom does so effectively, and it's something we can all learn from watching him, is that he's actually having a conversation with the audience. And he's really, it's almost like, and in this event that I was, there were probably 30 people there, but Thom gives his keynote in front of 3,000 people. And it's almost like he's talking to you. He has that amazing ability where he has already done all this preparation and rehearsal, and he's in total command of his topic, and he knows the audience really well, that he can just get in front of people and start having a conversation like the way he's having with me. And that, Thom, the way you do that, is that something that you rehearse, or is this something that you just have developed after giving almost like close to 3,000 keynote speeches? When did you figure out that that is the way to do it? Because, you know, let's be, some people give keynote and they're not that engaging. It's almost like they're, you know, there is that distance, and you try and you really close that distance so quickly, which is really amazing. And it makes you pay attention to what you're saying. And at the end, you really get a lot of valuable information that you're conveying to your audience.
Right. Well, it's both. Number one, it is a developed skill over time, and it is a practice skill over time. And, you know, when I first got in the business, I shirt-tailed another guy, which means I traveled with Thom. His name was Thom too, and not Thom too, but Thom also. And I traveled with him, and he always reminded me a good speech is done to an empty room first and a full room second. So every morning before I spoke, I'd go down to the room when it was empty, and I'd give my speech to an empty room. And I'd imagine engaging them during my presentation. So I developed the skill of asking questions of the audience as though I'm asking them personally, and then not waiting for an answer. So you ask a question which engages them in thinking, and then you pause, and then you give them an answer for their consideration. And I did that in the presentation you heard me do, is you ask a question, and then you wait, and then you answer the question as though they're answering the question. They're going, wow, would I have said that or not? So it's a communication format to an empty room.
Right. Thom, can you give a quick example of how you did that, how you do that? Pick anything.
Let me see if I can do this out of sync. How many of you ever bought a product and were amazed when you got done that the product didn't seem to be worth what you paid for it? Yes, and we all have that example. See how I answered it? We all have that example from time to time, don't we? So now I created a conversation with myself, but I let the audience think that what I'm saying back to myself is what they would say.
So you want to, at that point, you get the audience engaged, and suddenly they're like, okay, I am now having this conversation with Thom, rather than Thom just from the top, you know, dictating, telling me what I should do. You're almost like, hey guys, we're just talking, you know.
That's right. Am I presenting information, or am I in conversation? Those are two different formats. The majority of speeches that I hear are people presenting information. There is no conversation, because they never learned how to have a conversation with themselves. That's the secret. The secret is learn to be alone, converse with yourself, and play both your listener and yourself in the conversation. So if you ask the audience a question, like, think about how few people today shop for true value rather than shop for low price. And then you put yourself in the audience and say, well, if I left that open to them to answer, what would they say? Well, they say, that's right, man. The whole trend is to price-driven shop. People don't even care what it's worth anymore. They just assume the quality of the darn thing. And they're just out there figuring out how they can go to the internet, find out the cheapest way to buy it and the easiest way to get it to them. Now I've answered my own question, but the audience would agree with that. And that's a conversation with yourself. Practice it in your car. Talk to yourself in your car. See how good you are talking back to yourself.
Yeah, I actually do that. I carry, just like you.
You got a little recorder.
I carry this with me everywhere. Well, upside down.
Yeah, no,
you have one too.
Isn't that perfect? I do too. Yeah.
Yeah, I've recorded like so much here that at some point the battery runs out. It runs out of memory, actually. Thom, two more questions. I know that you have to get going here. What I just noticed is the way you give a speech in front of an audience is no different than the way you're conversing with me right now.
Right, correct.
It's like I can't tell a difference from the Thom that I saw last Thursday and the Thom that I'm talking to right now. Now, some people, it's not the same. When they're speaking in front of an audience, they look one way, and when they're talking to you, they're completely different. Seems like the way you do it is like you can have a conversation with one or with many, and they will not notice. It'll be the same Thom.
Right. So you take the conversation model to the platform. That's the secret. You don't take the platform model to conversation. So, and this is critically important. The important is a speech is a conversation. And you say, yes, but we can't converse. I said, no, but you can live the model of conversation from the platform. In other words, you can ask questions, you can pause, You can assume you've got some answers. You can propose the answers in front of the audience. You can confirm that reality, and you can move on so there's energy in the conversation. That is the key. And then the beauty of that is that there's so much more authority in a conversation than there will ever be in a presentation. So then you take the authority of the model of conversation, and you take the authority of the content, and you put them together, and you can't lose. You can't lose. But if you take the content, and the content has to have an authority that grabs the audience, whew, that's hard. That's hard.
Right. Thom, before we finish this interview, there's one particular thing I want you to explain to our audience in a little bit more detail. And that's what you mentioned about the first person, second person, third person, and so on. Because I think it is so important to know that, because a lot of the speeches that I see when somebody's starting out, they never bring their personal stories into their speech. And they are so removed that they'll bring in something that happened that anybody could have read in the newspaper or magazine or whatever. And what you do so well is you talk about your personal story, somebody you had a conversation with. And I want you to spend some time explaining that, because I think that is so critical that I didn't really understand it after you explained it, how important that is, at least in the words that you explained it in that talk that you gave last Thursday.
There's three levels of relationship any of us have with our content. Level one is I was in the accident, first person. I was the researcher, first person. Second person focus or relationship is I knew the researcher or I observed the accident. I was not in it. Third is I heard about somebody who observed the accident and told me about it, and I'm telling you what they told me about it. The farther I get away from first person, the less effective and sustainable will be my speaking career. I need to be first person. This is your experience. This is your angle. This is you. You own it because you were there. Sometimes I use second person, but I interview first persons so that I can bridge the gap between seeing the accident and explaining the accident is not just a hypothetical focus. That I can, like I wasn't in the plane when it crashed, but I talked to the pilot who lived through the crash. And I bridged the observation level between those two. Most speakers that I hear are third person. They talk about some line in some book written by somebody, some concept, some Zig Ziglar thing, you know, and all of a sudden they're giving away their own authority to that person. Okay. If I have a truth, I correlate my truth and I explain my truth. And you need to stay as close to the first person as you can. You say, how do I develop that? Well, I'm a journalist. So I write the story out, 400 to 500 words, and I read what I wrote, and then I circle the points in my story that I believe the audience will catch the audience's attention, and I align those points in my story. Like, for example, it happened and he walked away is a very catching line in the story. I flew into Traverse City, Michigan. I was late for the speaking engagement. When I walked in, I looked at the guy at the head table and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm the #1 pizza delivery guy in North America." And I go, wow. I never say at the beginning of that story, he's Thom Monahan of Domino's Pizza. I give the line because the line is more important than him being Thom Monahan. And then I roll the story out for there. But I was the guy who arrived late, came through Detroit, got to Traverse City, walked in. I was the guy who said to Monahan that. I was the guy who said, wait a minute, you're the #1 business delivery guy in North America. So you're in the pizza business. To which he said, not really. I'm really in the pizza delivery business. Well, bam. Now you've got a signature story that you own that's first person that has a wonderful point in it about what is the true purpose of anything you do. It's not what you do. It's the purpose of what you do that delivers the value of what you do. How'd I do on that?
Excellent, excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, Thom, yeah, that was excellent, because I think that was very important for people to know, because I actually have a habit of using stories where I could have used my personal stories, but I thought, oh, maybe I should use somebody else's
they're
story.
more important than you.
Right. But now I realize
we've all made that mistake over time. But the most valuable story is your story. The most valuable speech is your speech. Powerful.
Right.
That's powerful.
Right. Excellent. Thom, one last question before we close this out. There are lots of excellent speakers. Who are some of the speakers that you look up to, or some as a model, and who are some of the current speakers that people should kind of not emulate, but kind of watch some of the things that they do? Who are some of the people that?
Well, I'm an old guy, so I know old guys like Mike McKinley, one of the funniest, and he's not a comic, he's not a humorist. Mike can take anything that happens in life and make you laugh at it. That is a great speaker. A great speaker. Mark Sanborn. Mark speaks on leadership. When you think about Mark and the story he tells about his mailman, unbelievable. Fred.
Right.
I get so encaptured in the reality of that. I love the Ziglers of the world. They can tell great stories, and they can make you think about yourself better than yourself, and engage you in believing that you can go to the top. Those are the kinds of people. Today, people get so caught up in political speeches. I think Bill Clinton was a great speaker. He could engage an audience, he could disagree with you, and you wouldn't attack him for it. And because he was presenting his own concepts, he is a great speaker. Actually, there's so many today. I mean, when I got in the business 40 years ago, there were about 300 of us, who claimed to be professional speakers. Today, there's 40,000 of us who claim to be professional speakers,
All right, Thom, thank you very much. If somebody wants to know more about you, what's the best place they can find out more about you?
Google my last name, or search my last name, Winninger, Winninger. It will take you to winninger.com. That's my website. And down in the corner, you can subscribe. I do a Thom on Tuesday a couple times a month. You can subscribe to that, and you can start getting. And there's no charge to any of this. I mean, it's just if you enjoy the philosophy of the platform, I'm here for you.
Right, and I'll include it in the annotation, all the information that you just gave us. And Thom, let me thank you for your generosity of coming on this show.
No, Jay,
and I think what you just imparted, I think, is going to help me personally, but also it's going to help anybody who views this this YouTube video. So let me thank you, and we're going to be watching you on YouTube. And thank you very, very much for all the education that you provide in helping people become excellent speakers.
Good. And if you get near Minneapolis, let me know. I live here. I love it here. I look forward to seeing you here. Goodbye.
Okay, Thom. Thank you very much.
Over and out.